We are consumers, all of us. If you are an organic being, you are consuming something in order to survive. And that something was once alive.
Welcome to the GOAT Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Cassinan. At GOAT, we define sustainability through the lens of intentionality, circularity, and community. With this framework, any problem can be solved. The stories that we share, the pioneers that we talk to, show us a different way to build the future we all want to have.
We're at a pivotal moment where nuclear is needed more than ever. Let's once and for all become a circular economy.
Waste is not cost neutral. Like, it always costs your business something. So if you can get rid of that, then that's good for business as well.
There's this dissonance. We talk a really good game about protecting the ocean, but the purchase decisions that we make don't match with our espoused values.
An ideal food system revolves around relationship. Where is my food coming from? Who's growing it? How is it being grown? And why does that matter?
Thanks for being here. Let's dive into the conversation. I mean, one of the things that I find intriguing about what you do is like you do a lot of different things. I mean, you have mache on one side, which is really, really cool. Then you have the interior design on the other side. And I would love to start with just where did you begin with the interior space? Like, was it something that you did when you were a kid where you were just fascinated by the interior space and were like, I'm going to go down and do a career doing that? Or did you kind of fall into it?
Thank you for asking that. I have, only later in life realized that there were some pretty obvious signs in my childhood that I was a space maker. I used to live in the desert. I grew up in Arizona. So there wasn't a lot of trees to build any tree forts. So I literally created floor plans out of rocks and sticks and cacti corpses and would create rooms and just visualize the walls in my mind. And then later I realized, what a floor plan was. And, when I was in architecture school, I was immediately drawn to it. One class, I was hooked, So I think there was a lot of early signs that would have been a good place to direct me. I just ended up lucking out and moving, that way naturally. Architecture and interior architecture have a beautiful balance of both sides of the brain. You get that creativity, I mean, as much as you can truly think up, and then you also have that, analytical and science, usually like physics based component to building things. So both of those together make, furniture and interiors and architecture very appealing to me.
What is it about that like childhood wonder? I mean, like there's like this thing where if you were to go out right now and like lay rocks out, I'm sure you would actually see it, but oftentimes it's like, oh, well, that's what kids do. But like when you're a kid, you see it. Like you're like, no, I'm in this room right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you I mean, I guess like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is like, why do we lose touch of that? Like of that
Right.
like childhood like type of creativity. Was that
Mm-hmm.
something you had to kind of respark, or was it just always gonna kind of continue?
So I had early on signs of, just being really attracted to all types of art. So I didn't really realize it was architecture until I was in my, late teens and 20s. But early on, I was attracted to dance and art and clay and, music, like anything I could get my hands on. But I also really loved math and science. So I had just a passion for learning. And then, later on in life, I found yoga about the same time that I found design. So I was about 17 years old. And I remember, my art side really took off in my when I was about 10 or 11 because a dance was everything to me. That was the number one thing. I wanted to be a dancer. I went to 5 different classes every week. I was obsessed. And then I collapsed one day in the middle of this recital and I couldn't get up and I kept trying to push off the ground to stand and my knees kept giving out. And my mom took me to the doctor. They did x-rays and found out that I have a genetic disorder called chondromalacia, which is a lack of cartilage throughout the body, but it at this time was showing up pretty strong in the knees because we have a huge bowl of cartilage where your kneecap sits and kind of buffers the impact between the leg bones on either side. So I was crushed. My whole dream, my whole life, like everything fell apart. And my mom was so good to just kind of like turn me like 10 degrees towards another art form. And that's when I started to find music and then eventually drawing and painting. And that carried me through. So I always had a thread of creativity, but I had to evolve it or you know, just wallow in sadness forever. Like those were my two options. So I think with my mom's help, I really did feel like immersed in a whole new art eventually. We moved to France when I was 11. And I also think that experience being among architecture that's that old, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, that had a subliminal effect for sure. And seeing the difference between that and where I grew up in Arizona, which was a very ticky-tacky suburban home, everything rectilinear, everything the same, to, ancient structures that, twist and turn and have nooks and crannies and surprises. Like that really ignited my ability to see space and see it as something that could be creative outside of, this Arizona experience of space that I had. And then when I came back to the United States, I was 14. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. And over those 2 years, I just kicked butt in school, went to college classes when I was in high school just to get out. I knew that I wanted to go to college. I knew I wanted to go to art school. I was obsessed. And then I made my way to Oregon. My dad passed away 2 years later. My mom and I moved to Oregon, and she, again, sort of angled me in the direction to explore schools in the area. I found the University of Oregon, which had an art department that was called Architecture and the Allied Arts, which to me felt, like a very diminutive status to the art department until I took my first architecture class and got incredibly hooked and saw that art could be three-dimensional. It could be something that people can experience, that we can really shape someone's experience of their day, their life, their moment, their human interactions with space. And that became a love affair that I am still deeply committed to.
I mean, going through so many challenges like young. I mean, I think a lot of people, you have the typical challenge of like, I want to go to a university or I want, these challenges, and you may succeed or you may fail. But I mean, you had some significant challenges at like a young age. How do you think that kind of, I don't know, pushed you to get through it? I mean, yeah, you mentioned you had that choice of like, it could either be like, oh, I'm just going to live in this, or I'm going to move on to the next. But where does that move on to the next come from? Was it kind of parents teaching you? Was it just like this internal nature?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's hard to divorce that drive from my nature because I have had it since day one and, my mom recognized it, but it's very much supported by the nurture. She has always told me that I could be anything I wanted, was obsessed with space growing up as well, wanted to be an astronaut. She didn't even blink at that. You could be a dancer, an astronaut, whatever you want. And that was something I realize now as an adult, not everyone had. I just grew up with this innate message, you can decide. And I had privilege and the ability to decide. And my parents paid for my undergraduate education and told me I could decide. That is immense privilege. I'm so grateful for that. And I think about that every day when I use, physically apply that knowledge to my profession and my two businesses.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, and what was it like going from? I mean, I think there's this thought of like, here's what the world will be, and then here's what it actually is. I mean, I wanted to be an architect when I was a kid, and I was drawing all these floor plans on like sketch pads and everything, and I still have them, and it's hilarious like to look back at them. I was like, here's where the couch is gonna go, and here's where this, and it was like this wonderful thing. I remember I had this program called Total 3D Home at the time, and I was like learning how to design, in 3D space on a computer, and I thought it was the coolest thing. And then I thought about actually being an architect, and I was like, oh, I don't know about that though. What was it like when you went from the education to the actual profession? Like, was it what you expected it to be? Was it not what you expected it to be? Like, what was
Hmm.
the experience when you were like, I'm now going to be an architect and here's what's going to happen?
Yes. Well, to tell that story, I have to tell you a little bit about how the U of O structures or did structure their education back then. The U of O has a strong tradition of hand drafting and learning the craft from this, ancient perspective, and then evolving it into modern times. When I was there, they didn't even teach or offer CAD. So we learned how to hand draft, not kidding, from like our very first studio. And of course, I was immediately excited about that. Being someone who loved to draw and paint, that was my, comfort zone. So, but, very shortly thereafter, we got digital into Adobe programs, learning how to design in the computer, but never into the CAD realm. So, you can imagine getting out of school, that's the number one thing anyone in an architecture firm wants to see from an intern is that they can be what they call a CAD monkey, which is a computer aided drafting intern. And I didn't have those skills, but I had actually done two back to back degrees at the University of Oregon. So I got my undergraduate in architecture, but I had taken so many classes in the allied arts, including landscape architecture, interior architecture, that I was very close to having a master's in interior architecture by the time I graduated with my undergrad. So I continued on and taught classes at the U of O to pay for that secondary education. And from there, I was able to get a job from my contacts. I did a lot of networking over the 9 years I was at that educate or at that institute, and they had a satellite office in Portland, which is the big, bustling metropolis of Oregon, and I made a lot of contacts there. So I was pretty set up magically by the time I graduated. It was the peak of the housing crisis and a big depression for everybody, or recession rather. And I was just, again, incredibly fortunate to have made those contacts and was brought into a prominent architecture firm in Portland where I had the explicit responsibility to start and grow their interior architecture department. So when I get into these shoes, I realize, okay, there's a lot more than just the drafting that goes into, running an architecture firm. A huge component of it is getting the work itself, which is a marketing department. And then there's, of course, project managers and all kinds of different roles you can actually find yourself in or gravitate towards. Most of those roles are pretty segregated when you get into a large firm where you're not really privy to what's going on in marketing so much, or you might see a little sliver, and you kind of get, for lack of a better word, you can get pigeonholed into a certain set of tasks. And that time frame, I realized looking around at some of my colleagues, can last decades. So I was immediately more interested in learning the holistic approach to design. And that led me to develop this interior architecture department, and then eventually realize, hey, I could do all of this. I can do the marketing, I can do the client relations, I can do architecture up to a certain size, interior architecture, and I want to do it all with the overarching lens of health and wellness at the core of the experience and the product. You see that in architecture. At the time, you do not see that in interior architecture or interiors at all, decorating anything. That's almost worse. There's so much toxic chemicals that I became privy to as part of launching that department, doing tons of research into growing our materials catalog or library. And it was not only disheartening, it was terrifying. There is so much off gassing, polluting chemicals indoors. It's often 5 times worse air quality wise than outdoor. So that became a huge motivating factor, along with the idea that I didn't want to be pigeonholed in one task. I definitely wanted to be working with clientele directly, and I wanted to be seeing a project through from start to finish. So I went out on my own 4 years later and started my interior architecture firm, Two Yoke Design, which I still have today. It is 4 years old now, or 14 years old. Yeah, 14 years old, long time. So wait, that doesn't sound right. 12 years old. I'm like, what year is it? Yeah, 12 years old. Time flies. And that was at a time started in 2012. Wellness was not a buzz term. No one in interiors or really any of my clients were requesting sustainable measures. But I started to integrate these options and educate my community, my definitely my clients on why they would be, possibly interested in these more sustainable options. And I found that when you educate people on the health risks, that can be a bigger motivator than people, immediately understanding the environmental risks that can, be present in some of these harsh chemical laden finishes and furniture and decor items that happen to prevail in all of our interior spaces. So even to this day, like I I credit that knowledge to starting that department at that firm many years ago. It really opened my eyes, and yeah, I think that I realize in these chunks over the time of my adolescence and now into my career that we are very much porous beings. We are connected to our environment through just the sheer absorb, absorbing nature of our skin. And of course, breathing, inhaling and exhaling. We are literally sharing air with everything around us. So it's very important that that air be clean and be promoting our health and wellness and not undermining it. So that is my mission, still to this day, is clean up our interiors. Let's detox these spaces so that we can be comfortable indoors and, have that peace of mind to go with it.
I mean, I think the argument's a little bit easier nowadays, especially because you do have this huge focus on wellness. You have this huge focus on buildings and whether that's, passive house design, cleaner envelopes, and better building materials. But when you started I mean, I would imagine it was kind of more just down to cost. Like it was like, oh, well, that's not worth the cost. Like we can go with this cheaper material. What how do you start that? How do you honestly start that process? Because like it is a little bit about the health and wellness side of being like, look, do you want to be healthy? But at the end of the day, especially when it comes to like commercial space, it may not be as much about the home, for example, of like someone's actual living space. I mean, workspaces, we do spend a lot of our time as well, but the commercial builder's like, well, let's see what the investor says. Let's see what the actual economics around that. When you went out on your own, one, what was that first experience of like, okay, I'm now out on my own, now what? But then also, yeah, what was the starting point of the education? Because it was at a time that also I would imagine it was harder to get riskier projects going, especially coming out of a housing recession too.
In the very beginning, I have a client intake form that I give every client, whether that be a residential project or a commercial project. And I would introduce these concepts in that intake form. So trying to really suss out the values of the people and the project. And then that's in the beginning where you'd see a lot of, well, yeah, I'm interested in it as long as it doesn't cost more. And that was very much a mantra early on with a lot of my customers. But since then, this has been 12 years of evolution and very fast when it comes to the sharing of information. So I believe that, we're in this wave that is continuing to gain power and momentum that is the awakening of that knowledge that, there are chemicals all around us. It's in our food, it's in our air, it's in our clothing, it's everywhere. So early on, there was a pushback, but as soon as I started to reframe that conversation away from the health of the planet, that can be really hard to grasp, for an individual. Oh, I'm going to save the planet. What, just me? That can be very, it's a hard sell, but it's also a hard thing to believe in, truly as an individual. But you can very much start to believe in the power to shape your own space. You have control over your own domain, and you should know full well what's in it and, what might be harming you unknowingly. Just, you live in your life in your domain. So I always invite people to start from, it's not selfish, it's self-full. Start from this place of, hey, yeah, let me create a safe environment for myself. Usually for people that starts with food. Something goes wrong in the body. I call this whole process the wellness onion, an onion that grows layer by layer. And that first layer is usually, you know, you get sick. For in my case, with the knees when I was 10. In that scenario, that's a genetic disorder. But then later in life, in my late 20s, I found out that I had an autoimmune disorder. And that's something that I can very much manage today. So there's all these layers of usually things going wrong. And then instead of just wallowing in it and feeling sorry for yourself and usually being in a lot of pain as a result, what can you do to tweak these simple things in your environment, in the inputs that you're ingesting? It absolutely will impact your life and change it for the better. So there's a lot of, good that's happening on all these different layers or levels, in food and clean beauty and organic clothing and linens. There's a lot of good being done there. And I find a passion in that layer of interior design whether it be at your home or in your business, when you can feel 100% confident that the spaces that you're residing in indoors are truly supportive of your values and your drive to be the optimal, most powerful human and life form that you can be, then it's a that just next layer. But we should all start wherever we're at. And we can go on beyond interiors to look at architecture as a whole, city planning from a conscious perspective, and even out from that, travel and energy consumption. There are so many layers to address, and it can be really overwhelming. So that's why I invite people to look at it layer by layer and just really hone in on wherever you're at. Find ways to tweak it that aren't going to create a lot of friction for the shift so that you can actually make it happen and that you can eventually, embrace full-heartedly and adopt into your life long term. We are all starting from a different place.
Yeah, that's what I talk about a lot with kind of the sustainability mindset. It's this start where you are. Because if you go down the rabbit hole, there's an endless amount of things
Mhm.
that you could end up
Yeah.
obsessing over of changing, shifting, moving, I
Oh,
mean, everything. And then you're
yeah.
just kind of like, well, what's the point of all of
Right.
it?
Yeah.
And I love your approach of that, because it's like, okay, do what you can. Because the other thing too, I think the discussion a lot in the sustainability market is that, it's unattainable for most to be able
Mhm.
to spend the money to get the best of the best, or to do the
Mhm.
things that they need to do. So what can they do in the short term to make an improvement? And I guess my question to you would be like, okay, so let's take a person who's maybe in an apartment. They don't have control over their structure necessarily.
Mhm.
Where do they start with, their interior space, in actually improving the health of that interior space? Because I know we're going to get to definitely the yoga side and everything you're doing on
Yeah.
the mache side, and I think, part of yoga is breath. And so where does it start just in the interior space of somebody who maybe doesn't even own a home, just
Yeah.
apartment, and I want to
Absolutely.
be better tomorrow?
Totally. So, like you said, it can be very overwhelming when we feel inspired to look at our entire lives in one snapshot. That's just a recipe for failure. I like to encourage folks to zoom out, look at their lives, and evaluate which spaces do you spend the most time in first. Second, I would like to layer on top of that spaces that you may be most at risk. And that would be, in my book, a bedroom. Bedroom is where we are in a repair state when we're sleeping. We literally shift into an entirely different state of being, and our brains are detoxifying during this time frame, this rest and digest state of being. And without that detox, we go crazy. Like we really need that brain flush every night. So at that time, you're very vulnerable. You're reposed. You're in this dream world, and often we are, sweating in our sheets. We're breathing comfortably without thinking about it on lots of foam and off-gassing plastic chemicals. We're just not even thinking about it. It's all about the quality of sleep for most. But that can very much affect your quality of sleep. So I would urge people to detox their bedrooms. This is also the space where, we have intimacy with our partners, another area of life where we're breathing deeply and sweating and becoming more absorptive than usual. So you want to look at those spaces. Another space akin to that is the workout space, the space where you do pranayama or breathing practices or a yoga practice that involves getting your heart rate up and breathing deeply. These are often spaces that are filled with plastic things, props and tools, and sometimes even furniture that are off gassing chemicals while you're heaving and hoeing and trying to get into that pretzel. So it is, something you can tackle kind of room by room like that and feel great about it from the very beginning, because the first room will be the worst room. And then you're just getting it cleaned up one at a time as your budget and sort of, sanity can allow. It should be incremental and thoughtful.
And devil's advocate here, okay, I could go work out in living room. There's plastic chemicals there. My workout went fine though. I didn't notice a big difference. Like what's the, because I feel like a lot of the, I guess, the need to change comes out of either the,
Mm,
for lack of a better term, the oh shit moment where like the body,
yeah.
something's really going wrong.
Yeah.
How do you measure a timeline on that? Because
Isn't
I
that a
think
shame?
yeah, yeah, right. Because it's obviously these things that like they stack up over time.
Yeah.
I come from
You're
more of an
not
athletic
kidding.
background, and I've always been like very cognizant of how my body's feeling at every single moment. I mean, even last night I had a horrible headache because I hadn't been sleeping
Mm,
for the last 3 or 4 nights, and
mm,
still pushing the body. And it was like, no, I'm going to go an
mm.
absurdly long time of sleeping, go to bed super early, and woke up this morning feeling refreshed, energized,
New
ready to get at
person.
it. And yeah, and there was,
Nice.
I was very attentive of that, but that was also like I felt the effect of it probably 4 or 5 days later than it was having an effect on me.
Mhm. Mhm,
How
mhm.
do people, how
Yeah,
can people notice what's actually happening in their environment to them? Like what are
I
like some of the
love that
things?
question. Yes, I love that question so much. Well, the only thing that we can really perceive when it comes to off-gassing chemicals is the occasional scent. So this is the new car smell. This is any yoga mat that's cheapy, Target, $20 yoga mat. That smell. This is the smell of the cup that is not BPA free, that has been sitting in the sun with your soda in it, and you go to take the sip. That smell, that is all carcinogenic off-gassing chemicals. So anytime you smell something like that, get your face away from it. So that could be, some folks just accidentally leave their yoga mat in the sun. Sometimes we practice in the garden or even just in front of a window. I always recommend, if you're not willing to throw out all of your plastic stuff, or I would say repurpose them would be better. You could very much take these simple steps to make sure that it is not heating up. I wouldn't take one of those cheapy mats into a hot yoga class. Absolutely not. I would opt for a different mat in that scenario. So there are, ways that we can adjust when we get those toxic smells. But without that olfactory cue, we have to rely on the knowledge that the body bioaccumulates chemicals and heavy metals. And when we are exposed to these things, it's not overnight. It's very much like transforming your body for the better. It's not overnight, it's incremental. It takes weeks and months and sometimes years to get the results you're after. And that's the same thing with this level of detox. We are exposed to this stuff 24/7, everywhere we go, every single interior, super overwhelming. But look at the spaces you spend the most time in. Most of us spend over 50% of our time at work. So that's a big one. I would add that right after the working out, or maybe even equal to the working out space. And then look around you in your immediate bubble. Take it like a concentric circle. So the closer it is to your face, the closer it is to your skin, the bigger chance it's going to be absorbed. The farther it is away, definitely if you're not going to be smelling it. If it's across the room and you're smelling it, get it out of your house. That thing is toxic. But if it is, a useful tool, like a lot of our technology has plastic in it, right? So the ring lights and, all the cameras and podcast equipment, like all of that stuff is off gassing. But, it's best to keep the majority of it as far as you can from your face. That fine print on all the cell phones we buy explicitly says, do not place this phone on your face or near your head, which is a big, sign that we should probably be applying that same fine print suggestion to all the plastic and potentially heavy metal laden materials, which requires that we do self education. And that's why I like to build these tips and tools into Mache, my sustainable yoga and fitness storage company, as articles and soon to be YouTube videos that can help people tackle each individual layer as a project, a single project that can be incorporated, and then you can move on to the next layer and tackle a whole new project. And eventually, you'll feel pretty darn confident with the majority of your living environment being aligned with your health and wellness goals.
Yeah, and I think that's a massive thing to hit on too, is just like that self-education side of it doesn't have to be like the deepest knowledge of everything. It's, you know, I think part of this industry is about making it as frictionless as possible. So if it's digestible, which, being able to read an article or watch a YouTube video is pretty frictionless for a consumer. They don't have to read the super technical fine print. They don't have to go super far deep. It's more about like exactly. And I think that one of the interesting parts when you start to look at just our spaces is that you could say like, okay, let's get rid of the plastic and let's put wood in. And wood, it's been there a long time, and a lot of people would be like, oh, wood, you're cutting down trees. I'm like, but if the trees fell anyway and you're taking care of it, like it arguably could be just as sustainable. And I think that's some of this argument around sustainability. It's like when you look at some of the materials that we use, I mean, that's not even looking at how much plastic is in the ocean, and that's oftentimes us just throwing stuff away. And you look at all these waste streams that we actually create in our day-to-day life, whether that be in the pursuit of a nicer looking indoor space or a better feeling environment for us to be our best productive self or best feeling self. We don't look at materials as much as we look at aesthetics. So where did you kind of put those two together when you were building Mache? Because I mean, I think part of that is really, it's about aesthetics, but it's also about materials. So like how, and the health of a space. So where did that idea come from?
I've been obsessed with materials since starting that interior design department at my former firm. Materials are so sneaky. There is so much stuff that you would never know. Just even you saying, okay, let's replace that with wood. My mind immediately goes to, okay, well, what's in the wood? Has there been, absolutely check it for formaldehyde. Is there any, adhesives in there, polymers that would be off gas? So even wood, something I'm sitting here at a table right now, I didn't build this table. I didn't, harvest this wood. I am 100% sure that it was at least fumigated when it was traveling overseas to, the United States where I bought it, which is a process at, when you're shipping things overseas, different countries have different rules with customs, but almost everything that comes into the United States that is was once organic, like wood, gets doused in chemicals, just doused to kill any, mites or parasites that might be hiding in the wood. So it could have not even been designed to have chemicals in it, but it experiences a, toxic dose of them on the way to our stores. So there's the education piece is what I feel like is the biggest, most daunting piece because there is so much misinformation out there. There's so much money spent to hide information out there. And that's where I really love to dig in and I love to find out. There are a few resources that are doing fabulous job of rating materials, like the Living Future Institute, which I know you and I have talked many times about. They have ingredients, nutrition facts, if you will, for specific materials that have passed their standards, very high standards for sustainability. And I love reference. It's called the declare list. These materials that have been declared as being non-toxic. That is a fabulous resource. But in talking with you, I do feel like there is a need for a consumer-friendly app or organization to be able to immediately test something for off-gassing chemicals. That would be incredible. Some kind of meter that is an app. I don't know if your phone can smell yet, but in the future, when our phones can smell, we should design this app where we can really test something in real time before you buy it and understand, okay, there's phthalates in this, there's parabens, there's arsenic, hopefully not. There's uh, asbestos potentially, a lot of sneaky hidden chemicals, which right now you would have no idea. California is one of the few places that actually requires certain chemicals be called out as being carcinogenic. One state out of 50 has this regulatory practice, and I urge for a, national rollout of transparency. I would love to see nutrition facts on everything we buy so that people can make informed decisions. When you take the power away from the consumer, no wonder we're all sitting in this plastic world that we've let run amok because we have no way of knowing or telling the difference between this and, a natural, beautiful piece of wood.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so true, and even when you look at the material space, I mean, it's hard because I mean, as a manufacturer, I'll say from one side, you're constantly walking that line between performance and cost efficiency, because you have to operate a business at the end of the day, and oftentimes it's a race to the bottom. And when you start looking at buying a piece of wood furniture, right? If you get a solid wood piece, yes, despite it possibly being doused, a solid wood piece versus a wood piece in veneer and something like that, of course, the veneer one's going to be cheaper, but the solid wood one will last probably 40, 50 years. And so you just have this like constant battle going on. And I agree with you. Like when you can actually have more or less a nutrition label, you can make the choice. Like, yes, somebody can go buy some junk food. It very openly has it on the label. Hey, you're making the choice. And then you can also buy the food that is a lot more clean and transparent and better for the body, and allow the consumer to make the choice. And I think that construction and architecture and interior design and all those built spaces, those actually are the places that are missing the labels. And I love that you hit on that, because it is like, I think it makes it an easier decision for people when they can just see it and they go, oh, okay. Because if you don't know what veneer is versus uh, particle board, who would know exactly? And the process. And it doesn't have to be like an intense understanding of the entire process, but it's like knowing that, like, okay, this goes in that category, this goes in this category, because maybe somebody can only, afford something with veneer on it, and that's okay. But they maybe won't go the plastic route if they're about the same price. And so I think the more informed people can be about that, the better.
I think there's two levels of information that I would like to see be commonplace in the future, and I'd like to work towards this personally and professionally. One is exactly what we were just talking about, ingredients list for all materials and consumer products. Two, this idea that there is a life cycle consideration to everything that we consume. We need to become comfortable and um, aware. Let's start with aware, then comfortable with the fact that we are consumers. All of us. If you are an organic being, you are consuming something in order to survive. And that something was once alive. We are in this process of consuming life from the moment we are born to the moment we die. So that whole process, in order for that to be a life affirming process for the individual, but also, you know, um, provide future generations with the same opportunity, we have to become more aware of what we're consuming and what the impacts are of that consumption practice. So I'd love to see there be literally a lifespan attached to every single consumer product so that people can decide. Same thing, no shame, just decide and have the knowledge ahead of time of what you are buying and the implications thereof. So, let's say you need to have a picnic. You know that you want to have a bunch of disposable cutlery and plates for this picnic, and it's going to be a one-time affair. You pick up a box of plastic forks and it tells you 500 years, you'll know that that one afternoon picnic is not aligned with this box of cutlery. So you would opt for the box that's going to biodegrade in 6 months, 9 months, faster, you know, as close as you can get to the duration in which that you will need it, your use duration. So, with that table example you mentioned, if you're in a dorm room and you have to buy a table that is this crazy small dimension because it is literally the only thing that will fit in this little tiny space you have, and you know you're not in love with that table, you're not going to take it with you to your dream home 10 years from now, you will want to pick something that is going to last, let's say, 5 years. And, if it had that little duration stamp on it telling you what its intended life cycle was, And you had that ingredients list, so you could check, okay, I want to make sure that after 5 years, this thing isn't going to be, polluting the waterways, decomposing and adding all of these toxic chemicals into the world, that it will just biodegrade or compost or whatever the case may be. I feel like people would just naturally make these better decisions, even if they were more expensive, because the alignment is so satisfying. And you start to realize you don't need as much stuff. When you think about how long you're going to have it, you really start to wonder, oh, do I even need that? Maybe not. And you start to make different decisions on the whole.
And I love the thought of the life cycle measurement because when you I mean, yeah, if like the desk I have now, for example, it would have never fit in a dorm room or a small apartment that I used to live in. And it's like, okay, yeah, literally, it's a lot of space, and I use it every single day. And I think that one of the considerations when you start to do that too is like, what's the end life cycle of it afterwards? Like, I've been obsessed with figuring. I'm a very pen and paper person. Okay, somebody could say digital's better and don't use paper, but at the same time, how much cloud storage is that taking, and how much energy does that take when you start to look at the full footprint of everything? So you start to look at different types of paper, and for the past few years I've been using stone paper, which has been an interesting exploration because the whole argument around it is that it's limestone and it's not trees and therefore it's better. And recently I was like, is it better? And I started going a little bit deeper on it. And what's so interesting about it, it's not to say that it's not a solution, but for example, it is usually made out of the byproduct of making paper, for one, which, okay, cool. You can make another product out of it. But the hard part is you can't recycle it with paper. I didn't know that. Now I keep my notebook, so that helps. But like for the people who are, oh, I'm done with this notebook, I'm going to recycle it, right? I'm going to make the decision to recycle it. That stone paper in the recycling bin ruins the entire recycling of all the paper. And so now where are you at? Correct. And so I think there's also that genuine miseducation around like even the products that we have, what do you do with it at the end? Because most of the time it's just like garbage, landfill. Okay, but what if that could have a second life in 3 or 4 different places? If you take it to the right place, it could be deconstructed and sent to here and there and reused. And I think there's an entire business opportunity really in figuring out like what could be the second life of furniture besides the furniture itself. um because then the consumer, like, and yes, it could be printing of a QR code that's imprinted on the bottom that you never see, but when it comes time to get rid of it, you just scan it and you go, here's what I do with it. Okay, that makes total sense. And then it just gives the consumer all the information. Now, if they decide to or not, that's another story, but like at least you're giving them the option. Whereas right now, like if I had to get rid of this desk, honestly, I have no idea where I would take it to actually get rid of it in a good way. Like my first thought is as much as I want to do something with it, it's probably going to end up in the landfill. So what does a consumer do at that point? And that's why I love that you brought up the life cycle assessment because I think that's so important to kind of figure out what you do afterwards. And that honestly, I think leads directly into kind of what you do with Mache. So you're one of your yoga storage solutions, like it kind of has to do with that. So like where did Mache come from? Where did the thought process come from and why was it a need?
So I am, in addition to being a wellness designer, I'm also a big time yogi, and I have been, as I said, since I was 17. So multiple decades now. And my practice has evolved right along with my design sensibilities and my career. And in the course of building To Yoke Design, my firm, I approached yoga studios that I would frequent in Portland and was able to work with them directly to improve their spaces and better align them with their health and wellness clientele. Not only their goals, but it's a really good place to start to change the industry is to work with other like-minded business owners that are trying to change the industry towards health and wellness. So yoga studios and I are very compatible when it comes to design. So in that process, I realized that storage is a big problem when it comes to managing our healthy routines. It just is. Whether you're in the bathroom trying to get ready with your natural beauty regime, or if you're in the kitchen with your natural, smoothie station, or if you are on the mat with blocks and straps and blankets and bolsters and balls, and oh my gosh, it just goes on and on. So that's just yoga. There's a million at home, stay healthy and fit practices out there right now. And there's just really no good place or way to store all this stuff. So it started off as a pitch, an idea for specifically business owners, studios, and gyms to organize their businesses. I see the storage problem as being exponential there, and they did too. So the earlier sales were really, just like a love fest between me having a burning desire to help this community and then this community having a burning need for storage. And then, the cherry on top is that the storage that I was designing then and still design today is made from non off gassing sustainable materials. So my palette is paper. Not very many designers work in paper, wood, of course, metals, leathers if they are sustainably treated. The palette can vary from client to client, and we can get fancy into innovative materials, things from, like hemp, algae, mushrooms slash mycelium. There's a lot of fun things happening around renewable types of wood like eucalyptus and bamboo. But ultimately, the yoga community was receptive to what I was proposing in terms of, extending your health and wellness values into your built environment. And the storage I was selling was solving that just pure functional storage need. I incorporated the company a couple months before COVID hit and closed all of those customers down. The studios and gyms closed for many of them never reopened, sadly, but at least a year and a half to 2 years, we saw pretty much a complete collapse of the studio fitness environment. During that time, I pivoted Mache to the at home need of the fitness or wellness enthusiast. So, specifically, yoga storage for the yoga mat is made out of paper. It's our homey yoga mat tube. It is totally tubular, industrial strength paper core that we lovingly wrap with a designer interior grade luxury paper that's made from renewable fibers. And then we cap the bottom of this tube with particle board that is 100% formaldehyde free. And all of that is made right here in Oregon. I got immediate response from the community that this was a need when I launched an Etsy store in the peak of COVID. And then I've just been growing ever since, building out the line with block storage and strap storage and getting these things up off the floor and onto the wall with brackets. And I'm expanding in this new year back into studios and gyms. I can't wait to connect with my fellow small business owners again and help solve their storage problems on that commercial level. But ultimately, I'm still singing this tune everywhere I go, whether it's, teaching classes online and educating people through, just even yoga and meditation. I weave in the concepts of having healthy interiors to support your practice, but also meeting people, just connecting with those business owners again and making sure that they know that there are options out there to choose from that are not always the most expensive options. Often they're simple solutions, and they often involve These, the most sustainable design measures are often very local. If you live in the right spot, you're using, local labor, you're employing local people. Hopefully, you have local resources from a material standpoint that can be celebrated. And that's really how I look at it is natural materials need to be celebrated. They need to be celebrated for how truly luxurious and gorgeous they are, in stark contrast to chemical plastic produced furniture and interior finishes.
I find that natural materials, I mean, nature's the best designer, I think. And it's like, yeah, you go out in nature and you're like, wow, I mean, you look at a leaf reflected into the sun, and you look at the complex design that even just one leaf has, and you're like, okay, now let's look at the rest of the forest. And you're like, there's so much actual thoughtful design in the natural world that, now it's, kind of coined as biomimicry, but it's the idea of like, how do we learn from the design of nature and integrate that into our now hopefully natural designs, but even synthetic designs. I think question on the fitness side of things. So I've done yoga for a long time as well, and I don't know. I like to do yoga practice completely on my own. Not really been a class person. Go to classes occasionally. I'm like, it's all right, but I'd rather just do it at home. Where do you find the fitness industry kind of starting to go? Is it more of an individualized practice like since the pandemic? Is it more something that people want to go back to classes, or is it entirely individual? And I guess the follow up to that also is it's always a bucket solution at yoga studios. It's like, oh, if you didn't bring your mat, there's a bucket of yoga mats that you have no idea who used it beforehand. What was your kind of solution in that?
Studio life pre-pandemic was booming, bustling. Oh my gosh. I mean, literally like a yoga studio popping up on every corner, right? So it was almost getting to a point of saturation and competition between what was then over 85% independent. Like, what industry in the United States had that much of an independent presence and that little of a corporate one? However, COVID hit and closed all of the business down, and the strong survived, right? So the people with the big deep pockets, the people who were quick and nimble, and who could reorganize their entire business to a streaming model and hop on it as and get those early adopters first, right? Those ones, even the small mom and pops that were nimble like that, have continued to stay open. They survived, and now again they're thriving. Now, post COVID scenario, studios are opening back up. We were last summer, we were about like I would say 20, high 20s to 30% occupancy. And now it's well over 50. Studio life is back. People are becoming more comfortable with managing, virus mitigation with masks and still kind of venturing out of their homes and getting back to their normal lives. However, I think it was a very interesting silver lining to that shutdown with COVID, where they're absolutely forced if they wanted to find some level of their yoga connection, and they were previously 100% studio yogis, which I had been for years in my practice, almost like 95% studio. They were forced to learn how to adapt that at home and do it on their own. And that usually means, the practice isn't as long. You're not like going like 90 minutes on your own and pushing yourself to these levels that I think a lot of studio junkies crave. But I feel like there's so much magic in the at home practice, and it can be a very hard hurdle to instigate on your own. So that factor of COVID making everyone do it, people fell in love with that little piece. And I love the visual I have of folks looking at their homes and evaluating like where can I carve out a space that's all mine? And it's about me feeling good. It's about me reconnecting when I don't feel good. And it's about me making decisions about this space and my time and my energy, and pretty much creating boundaries for other, outside forces not to enter. That power of self-care space creation was a huge benefit to the tragedy that was COVID for, the people who were able to cultivate that at home. And I think they're keeping it. So you see a lot of that hybrid solution now where folks are still holding on to their streaming services, these at home, yoga platforms. There's so many now, and other workout, modalities. Hit. I'm a huge hit person, love that. And I still practice that at home. But there is this old school energy of the studio environment where, traditionally yoga was practiced in group settings, and that energy you get from the collective when you're all working independently but together is, I like to think of that as a reset to my practice. So I like to tap into that and then go cultivate it on my own time most of the time these days.
I really like that. And I love that the idea of the space, making it intentional for what you're going to use it for. I mean, even in our home when we moved in here, it was like we're, going all around. We're like, okay, so the yoga mats could go here. And it was like, and if it was like there was going to be a possible piece of furniture there eventually, it was like, okay, but we really have to consider where are the yoga mats going to go? Yeah. And I love that. Yeah. And then I don't know why it's just so inconvenient to have to move something in order to roll out a yoga mat, but for some reason it becomes that way. Yeah, exactly. And so, okay, the storage of it though, because I will say, like, for the longest time, I was always all I need is a yoga mat. That's all I need. Now there is blocks, there's a strap, you got bolster. I mean, just more. Where do you put it all? Like where do people usually put it? So like we have like a little wicker basket that a lot of the stuff just kind of lives in. What's kind of been the go-to for a lot of people?
That's all we have. We have the ill-fit basket, which never is sized for these objects. These objects are usually like super precariously long and, circular or rounded. And everyone has had the basket or the just pile of junk. That's more common, actually. Before the basket, there was the pile, and then there was the basket. And now there is the homey bundle, which is a intentional solution, aptly, designed to fit the awkward shapes. We like to say that homey holds all your awkward things. You don't have to limit it to yoga mats. You can put golf clubs in there, and foam rollers are really awkward and same kind of general cylindrical shape. We've had lots of, not lots, but a handful of moms send us photos of all of their kids' toy swords. Apparently, this is a really big problem is toy swords popping out of the homey tube, and they're just so grateful. Like, oh, I've been looking for something for these swords. And then and multiple, it's pretty hilarious. But, yeah, it is an interesting shape. We deal in cylinders, cylindrical shapes here at Mache. We also, build cabinets and orthogonal or rectilinear objects for your typical cubby needs, but the tube is really unique. People don't often come into contact with the tube unless it is in a smaller scale. So we do get the pushback like, oh my gosh, this is just, a paper tube. How could you be charging so much for this? And well, it's jumbo. This is not your grandmother's little makeup paper tube or your, paper towel paper tube. This is an industrial strength, really high quality. It's a durable piece of equipment that will last as long as you need it. And then when you don't need it, you don't have to think twice about it polluting or disrupting any ecosystem on its, descent into compostability. It is, something that can be matched to your environment, so a bit of a chameleon too, with all the patterns that we wrap. So that yoga mat holder is really the core product. It's what most people have is the yoga mat to start. But like a gateway drug, you quickly start to collect other items. Blocks have to be my absolute favorite out of all of the yoga props. And that's something that people I feel like don't often experience at home when they have just that home practice. And where studios can be great to tap in and learn something new with props and see people using them and applications that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of on your own. So eventually you get those blocks and that evolves the practice completely and opens up areas that were previously inaccessible. And then of course the strap can do the same thing. It provides a different way of looking at your body, a different lens. And all of these items should. Ultimately, our goal is to build out storage for all the things, so we could have a collection of intentional homes for these items. The things that we cherish really greatly, like a beautiful pen needs the cap to keep it nice. Our hands need to stay nice and warm and protected in, the elements. It's like a glove to a hand or even like a sheath to a knife, like this is your tool as a wellness warrior. It should not be schlubbing over in the corner polluting your mental space and your physical space. So with the organization, solution, you have a piece of art, but more importantly, you have a functional piece of art that's actually doing something to clean up your environment, which ultimately cleans up your state of mind. Messy desk, messy mind.
Indeed. Yes. And so I think on the material side, I this is something I've always been curious about. So, I mean, when I started going down the block side of things, for example, well, first one I got was the hard foam until the hard foam like kind of weirdly got soft in one spot and tipped and you almost like wreck your wrist doing something on it. And you're kind of like, "Ooh, I need something more rigid than that." So now I use cork in the best way I could research said, hey, this is a super sustainable material. This is like the way to do it. What is it like in yoga mat block accessory material land? Where does somebody actually go? Because I mean, there's like, oh, cork's the best. It's the only one. Some people are like, I absolutely hate cork. Some people are like, I love cork. Like, what do you do?
So, again, I think it's really important for people to look at their application and what they're looking for out of it. So, we really only have three options when it comes to yoga blocks. We have the EVA foam, which you're talking about. It's called EVA. This is very toxic stuff. It's carcinogenic. Any foam that provides this squish, so that would be that squish that you fall off the block because of, but it would also be the squish in your tennis shoes, that insole that provides that cushion. Those puzzle mats that kids play on or we work out on, any squishy, thicker kind of Pilates mat or workout mat, all of that is EVA foam. And that has been banned since 2011 in Belgium for its carcinogenic properties and its propensity to create developmental issues in pregnant women and babies. So, that's nothing I want near my face and it absorbs through the skin. It absorbs through the air. It's airborne. That is it's near our children and it is in our workout spaces. So I also have those blocks. I do. And I think most of us do. That is the cheapy block. It's the entry block. You don't know if you're going to become a yogi when you start the practice. You just are starting to understand, I guess I'll explore this body and see what I find out. But as soon as you become aware, I recommend that people move on to the other two types of blocks and then repurpose the plastic one elsewhere. And we can talk about ways to repurpose that. But the other two options are the cork one that you have, which is a brilliant solution. Cork is the bark of a tree that can be harvested many, many times without harming the tree. So as long as it is free of chemicals that might be in glues holding, the cork together, then that's a fabulous option. Super sturdy. Then there's wood blocks. Wood blocks are come in all shapes and sizes and weights. That's the thing with wood. Wood is generally pretty heavy. So, in certain yoga practices, the slower, the more restorative, the yins, the gentle yoga, heavy block is a huge benefit. It means that that block is less likely to move when you're leaning your entire weight into it or resting your entire weight into it so that you can focus on, the breath and elongating the tissues or whatever you are working on with that posture. However, those wood blocks can be so heavy that they can be hard to move around, especially for younger and older populations. So we've actually worked with a nonprofit organization in Nicaragua to develop the world's lightest wood block, which is light in terms of actually it is quite light in color as well, but I'm speaking of in weight. And that was made from balsa wood forests in Nicaragua. So there are a lot of forests that are felled each year with hurricanes that blow through that area annually, and all of those forests are just wasted and they biodegrade, and that resource was previously untapped. We had to create a whole export process around exporting balsa as a commercially viable product for the very first time from Nicaragua to the United States for these yoga blocks. And they are just stunning. They are the feel of practicing with them goes far beyond what you might think of in terms of, oh, they look pretty, or oh, that's a nice lightweight to them, akin to cork, or sometimes even lighter. There is a softness, a quality, a character to it that it goes beyond something that you can explain. It has to be something you experience in a practice. I am absolutely over the moon in love with them, and I can't even imagine practicing with a piece of foam. Once you upgrade to this level of, and once you're ready to upgrade, I wouldn't suggest that everyone, go out and get the most expensive or the best quality item right out the gate. Go to a couple studios first. Don't buy anything. Just practice with other equipment first and get to know which pieces are you really going to want to bring into your life, because once you buy a set of these beautiful balsa wood yoga blocks, you're going to have them forever. And then eventually, the finish on there is all natural beeswax. I mean, that whole thing can biodegrade with such beauty and grace. You never have to feel the little micro depression of throwing something out again. And I want to get rid of these depressions that I feel every time I am forced to dispose of something that I know has a life cycle that's far beyond my own personal life cycle. That is not a good feeling. And over time, just like the bioaccumulation, that chips away at us. We become depressed. I want the opposite. I want the bioaccumulation of feeling great about every time I use those blocks, every time I reach for them, that memory of the future peaceful death, if you will, of that product is a positive, uplifting. What's the opposite of depression? Micro lift. It's a micro joy.
Well, and I also think about like that. I don't know, as I start to think about the longevity of just life, right? You're going through life, you're doing your thing, you find your focus on what you want to do in life, and you find little points through that where you reflect on, oh, it's been a decade of doing something, and you're like, wow, what a journey it's been. when you have certain things that have been with you that entire time, they kind of age with you as well. Like the wood will actually change and age with you. I think it's like there's something beautiful about using natural materials. Yeah. And to actually let it take its course. New is a state, but the moment it's used, it's not new anymore. Like I'm in favor, honestly, of getting some things new for sure, but knowing that like that is only a point in time. Like you want it to get used and broken in and fit to you. And I mean, you take linen for example, like new linen won't fit a person, but you wash it a few times, you wear it a few times, it suddenly like looks like it was made for them. And it took the natural shape of the person. And I think that when we look at the materials and the things that we buy, we oftentimes don't pay attention to that. Like the fact that everybody wants something that's individually theirs. You know, they're like, oh, I bought that because nobody else has it. Well, if you are very intentional about what you buy, everything will be individual to you because it will take its own shape in your own life the way that it should. Like multiple people have balsa wood blocks, hopefully, but no one balsa wood block will look like the next one. And that I think is the fun part.
Yes, so true. No, that makes it entirely unique in a world of mass produced, homogenous products that can just be, for lack of a better term, like injected, molded into place, same every time, having those flaws, those beautiful pieces of a natural process that age with time, and that the idea of a patina is so attractive to me. I feel like it is what is missing in a lot of people's lives is this connection to their own life cycle and the embrace of change and evolution and how you have these phases in life. It's not about a peak. Each one is valuable. Each one has magic and value to it. So if we're putting all the emphasis on youth and new and perfect, we're missing out on this great opportunity to see all of this beauty and strength and inspiration from all the different stages of life. What I love using materials that very um loudly communicate their evolution for that reason, to connect people to the natural life cycle of things. For instance, I designed a tasting room here in Southern Oregon at a biodynamic vineyard that achieved Oregon's first small business living building challenge certification. So it was a big project, and a huge goal of mine in that project was using materials that I knew would change with the elements over the decades of this building being in place. So those were things like cork. We used dark brown cork on the exterior. It's actually an inside the wall insulation material generally, but we flipped it onto the outside because it was just this huge chunky pieces of cork and so beautiful. But cork, I knew from having yoga blocks for so many years, is extremely UV sensitive. So you can see that the where the cork opens up and you can see the holes in the cork, that remains quite dark and rich, where the outside portion of the cork that has been, cut into a rectilinear shape and therefore has these cut faces that are exposed to the sun, have absorbed so much more lightness and really created a two-tone effect to that product in the end and to the whole facade of the building. Another piece of the building we worked with was wrapping the roof that came down to meet the ground in Corten steel. And Corten steel has just this almost bloody transformation from a typical steel color that you would picture, in a steel yard as a raw silver into eventually what becomes a dark red, rusty, completely protected by its own rust. But there's this huge arc of transformation in between those two states. And it can take years and years and decades and decades and decades. So you really can't experience it from day to day. You have to experience the changing of the seasons. You have to be in touch with the peeling of time to really see the full beauty of those materials in action.
Oh, that's so cool. Like, honestly, what a cool design. Like, and what a cool project. I mean, especially for
Oh,
the
so
people to be like,
fun.
hey, yeah, run with this. Because I think
Their
that,
whole vineyard's constantly changing, like that.
yeah.
People like that live in change and see and directly connected to the seasons. They're so intimately connected with the earth. I was jealous. I wanted more of that, more of that expression and that relationship, that communication between all things living that are all bound by these same natural laws and conditions.
And well, and the degradation of something or the changing of something, that it is part of the fun of the process too. It's like, what could it be? What could it look like? And I think I've always been confused about this weird. I think it's like a disconnect in society where, take luxury for example, the luxury market. Everything, minimal amounts made, incredibly well made, handmade, sustainable. Yeah, debatable. In some cases, yes, but in some cases, not. However, the thought process is, let's not make a ton of these and let's make them last. And oftentimes the value ends up going up of that thing. And then you look at, the whiskey side of things, and, some of these places, up in Northern Ireland and that kind of area, they're in barrels that have been used for, decades and centuries, and salt water and all this stuff. And those are always put up on a pedestal. It's like, wow, if I could only have a glass of that. Yet we then go buy the thing that is super cheap and not. So, and I've never been able to understand that mindset of, like, why not apply that same mindset to everything that you do? Because then you're always going to be just as excited to sit down and use that notebook or that pencil or use that mug that you drink out of every single day. Like, you're just going to be excited about it every day. And I think it brings a certain richness to life, and it'll change. Where do you think that, yeah, where do you think that disconnect, I guess, kind of happened? Like, was it the excitement to make things quickly, or
Yes, yes, I suspect the evil siren of convenience lured us towards the rocks, and everyone is complicit. We all have aspects of our lives where we preference convenience over our intellect, over other um, values. And the first step is education, educating yourself, but then the second step, way harder, is applying that education to your life. And in the beginning, we're all going to apply it where it seems like the path of least resistance. It's going to be easier here, and where we don't want to look at the egregious practices that we do over here. So we're all complicit, and we have to just be honest with ourselves. I think it comes down to this first step of realizing I'm a consumer. I consume. I need to come to peace with the fact that I can do this responsibly. The world might be stacking it against me to lean into convenience and block out this new knowledge I just gained, right? But I don't think we can do that. I don't truly believe people can block it out. They might be able to do it for a certain amount of time, but the more that we're all talking about this together, the more that, this knowledge becomes something that we demand, the industry will shift. People are unaware how powerful they are, unaware. As an interior designer, it is my duty to help push that industry forward into a place of doing better by its people and the planet. And every industry needs that. So we just have to look at it as a process that we are a part of. And we can start with our own domain and we can build out from there. It doesn't have to be a overwhelming, and it also doesn't have to be a process filled with shame. I struggle with that too. There's things that wish I hadn't done or didn't still do. And, all that negativity built around the process is going to make the whole thing more difficult. It's not going to feel as good. If we can start to look at it as an empowering position, you know, yeah, we're not going to save the world as one human being. Of course not. But I can very much clean up my space, can't I? Oh, I can totally, choose between this vendor and that vendor, or this handbag and that handbag, or no handbag. We can start to really evaluate, okay, what do I need? And, you know, once you get a certain age, you start to realize that all a lot of the purchase we make along the course of our life don't make us happy, like the ones that we think are going to be like finally the thing we've always wanted. Once we get it, there's that die down of enthusiasm, and then we're off to the next shiny object. So I think at a certain age we all kind of realize, oh yeah, there is this trap that is set in front of us 24/7. If you're living in the modern world, you are being bombarded with messages that are designed to make you feel like you need something to feel better, to feel complete, to be happy. And it's really up to us. That's where we're empowered to stop the noise and think about it. Every decision, every day provides you with what, 30 to 30 opportunities to do that. Even if you get one, even if you catch one time that you're about to do something that might be misaligned with your real goals and your aspirations for yourself or the planet or whatever your values are, and you catch yourself before you do it, that's a win. And it'll just be more and more often like a muscle. It is exactly like a muscle, or tending a garden. It's not overnight. You have to plant these seeds, you have to water this. There's love and attention and observation involved. And the more we can just observe without judgment and guilt and shame and all these like just deflating feelings and self-imposed concepts, and we just focus on, but what did I do? Dr. Amen is a neuro genius, and he has a couple of tips that he recommends for optimal brain health, one of which I love to adopt at night. And it's just what worked today. Right before you go to bed, you just scan your brain for what worked. And it's really easy to see the things that didn't work. Often we carry those willingly right on top of our shoulders everywhere we go. But right before bed, to prepare your mind for optimal regeneration and sleep, and ideally a better tomorrow, just scan through the things that worked and feel into the wins, and you'll get more and more and more and more of those. And then that's something worth shifting your life for, as opposed to taking things away and feeling, bad about yourself in the process.
And knowing that we're not going to be perfect in that, like none of us are perfect in that process. Like there are things that you purchase or do in your day-to-day life where you're not perfect. Nobody is. And you can't expect that perfection to actually be there. But I love that you mentioned that it's about recognizing the wins and the progress, and that serves as the fuel. And the more you train the muscle, the more you do the thing. And I think one of the things too is it's that idea of pausing. And maybe that's from you really diving into yoga for a long period of time in your life.
Probably.
But really that I just don't feel people take enough time to pause and just like take a moment. I mean, and it's
Mhm.
and fair enough. Like it's easy enough to be running around like crazy. I mean, even for the last few years, I've been running around like crazy, trying to build a company. And
Mhm.
and when you do that, oftentimes you're like, oh, I don't have time to step back. But when you actually
Mhm.
when you intentionally take the time to step back, you it literally makes it so much more clear what one the path forward is, but also the more effective path forward in whatever you're trying to achieve. And I mean, even over the holidays, for example, I turned my phone back into basically a dumb phone completely. Like there's no calendar, there's no email, because I was finding
What?
myself going over and just like pressing the email, unlock
Excuse
phone,
my
go to
language.
email, and I was like,
Yep.
oh, don't do that. And
Muscle
haven't
memory.
yeah, and haven't been on social media for a little while. And what's so interesting is when you go
Nice.
back to it after a period of time, you go, whoa, what what is all this junk?
This is intense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a to B moment where you realize that difference,
Right.
and it could be
Yeah.
different for whatever anybody's trying to work on in their own lives, but by taking that step back, it
Mhm.
really resets everything. And I don't know the best way to encourage people to do that besides just saying go do it, but like that
Mhm.
step back is probably the one of the most important things anybody could do to pursue
Mhm.
anything that they want to do, whether that's doing better at their job, whether that's doing better about their
Mhm.
consumption or their energy use or their sleep or their health, or just pause for a sec and take
And I
inventory.
would add like a layer to that step back where I would say I have found my most successful zoom out or step back moments have happened as a result of me connecting with nature, understanding the cycles of nature, being um, like taking a minute to acknowledge nature. Like that's when it ends up working best for me. And I think that we can't, as busy people, myself included. I have two companies I'm running. I am wow busy. I have to really look at what's realistic here. What are my goals? I want to be connected to natural cycles more often. I'm, at my computer all the time. I'm in the digital scape loads of time, more time than anything else I do. I'm online. So, how can I not have every day feel the same like, in this metaverse or whatever, but actually have the experience of the natural cycle of things. So I've decided to start hosting bi-monthly meditations on Instagram Live, just 10, 15 minutes at the full moon and at the new moon. The moon governs all of our oceans. It governs the way that the magnetic pull varies across the surface of the earth from the north to the south pole. That moon has so much literal sway in our experience of life, being mostly made of water ourselves, right? We never acknowledge it. Most of us are indoors long before the moon comes out, and we are on our computers and our screens in front of our TVs, just not connected to this natural process. Can I take a minute to connect with the moon every day? Probably not, where I'm at right now in life. But at these peak moments, twice a month, hell yeah, I can. And I would love for everyone to join me because that 10 minutes might seem so small, but you've done it. You've connected in that moment. You're acknowledging this peak state of a natural process that is occurring and affecting you, whether you like it or not. Therefore, you are more connected to it, even if you just acknowledge it. That's all it takes.
So my connection with nature, I try and spend time in nature every single day, just a little bit. Could be 10 minutes, could be 15, could be an hour some days. Wonderful. But spend some time connecting with nature, and sometimes I'll, my way of equating it to a lot of people when I'm having a conversation is like realizing that one, we're a part of nature, but also we're not more powerful than nature. Like if anybody's been surfing or in the ocean when it's a little bit scary, and you get rocked by a wave, you have this internal feeling of like, oh, whoa, this thing's powerful, much like forest, exactly. And I think, and you look at that with the moon and how that actually, if you look at all the different animals that are affected by moon cycles, and it's like that shows that there's so much going on that we honestly don't pay attention to, and that when you do pay attention to it, you just get a new perspective. And I think that new perspective is so valuable because it simplifies things. It's like, okay, well, what can I do today?
It makes me feel like a part of a beautiful organism. And how can I make my part function the best and, optimize the whole in the process? But it's a practice, just like everything else. We can easily get swept up in all the social media and all of the regular media. It's a lot of media, frankly, out there. So it's a ocean that you have to swim through to get the right kind of messages. But then sometimes it can be really scary, like you said, to be still and have no messages. That stillness took me years. I used to hate it. I couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts. That was the scariest thing ever. Now I crave it. But it took what, 2 decades? Like it is again a muscle. And the more we can zoom out and find that place of stillness to kind of see things as they are, not with us behind the controls of the ship, but actually look at the ship as something that is, you're outside of it. That is that same part of connecting with nature is connecting with yourself. It's all the same process. Of course, in the beginning, if you're super disconnected, it's going to feel weird and awkward and uncomfortable and boring and all the things. But the more you do it, the more you will shift. Just same thing, bioaccumulation, mental accumulation, shift to a place of craving it, and you'll need it. Like you said, every day you need it.
And I agree with you that like that boredom, that anxious feeling of like, ooh, I need to be doing something. Like for me, it's that application of like, well, if I'm not pushing the company forward in this exact moment, is it still going forward? And it's like, yes, it'll still go forward, and it's okay to step back for a sec. And I found that like a couple weeks ago, I pretty much raked the entire backyard and just was like very methodical about the whole process, and was like, that was so nice. Like it was just like there's something so soothing about something so simple thing that needed to be done. It wasn't trying to be rushed to get done so I could go back to something else. It was just be here and rake the yard. One row, another row, and just keep going. And it had so much benefit for me. And so what do you think is like the thing that I think most people can do to kind of find that? Because I think part of this whole entire thing, whether it's interior design space, health, wellness, sustainability, I mean, all of that, it comes down to the person making the decision or feeling good about making the decision or feeling in a place that they can make the decision. What do you think is the most beneficial thing that somebody can do? Is it the breath work? Is it meditation? Is it yoga? Is it pausing? Is it nature? Is it all of it? Like what do you think somebody can actually do to just like pause and stop the most?
I think there are two things. The nature aspect, huge. For many of us that are type A people or really go getters, movers and shakers, literally movers, they want to be moving. And being still in some, cave in a lotus position sounds like hell on earth. So, for that type of person, hiking, walking, being in nature gets that rhythm going, like with the rake, where you're the raking made me think of EMDR therapy. And I wonder if you were working through some, processes with this kind of repetitive one angle to the next angle. It's usually from like upper left to lower right with the eyes that can help process. And you can start to feel fabulous afterwards. And it's just this very simple action in the moment, but it draws your attention to what you're doing. And that state of presence is what they all call the flow state, when you're doing anything and you kind of lose track of yourself and time, and you're just so immersed in the action that you become one with it. That's the goal, right? Like, how do we all get back and into this present state of experiencing every moment? And if we did, I think, like look at the smile that Dalai Lama struts around with. Like there that level of joy is hidden inside of us. Like we have it in there. We have to find ways in our own bodies to, so that's the other side. So being in nature, one, two, get inside your body. lot of us are disconnected from our bodies. I was so disconnected when my knees gave out in that recital. The doctor, doctors gotta take them with a grain of salt. But back then I didn't know. And they told me, oh, yeah, you'll need surgery by the time you're 30. You should never run, skip, jump again. I was 10 years old. So I had braces on my knees like Forrest Gump. It was a whole thing. And then I realized later, oh no, I can manage this. I've never had surgery. There are things, we can do. But oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with that. So I was referencing the early shoot, I forgot where I was headed with that one.
I mean, well, a lot of it, I think it comes down to being back inside your body and being able to know
Yeah, oh,
like
that's
that
where I
your
was
body's
headed. So
capable.
I was told not to be in my body basically. Like that doctor basically said, "Stop being in your body." And that was my whole life. So I very quickly went into my mind and started painting and drawing and disconnecting unintentionally from my body from age 11 to 17. And that is a huge time where people are playing sports and they are, being active and, some way or another running around being kids. And I didn't have any of that. So when I found yoga, there was this reconnection, my way of getting back into my body, but that's not the only way. People can find it in all different types of therapy. I really appreciate therapies that are not, or movements that are not going to impact you long term. So, runners have a lot of issues later in life. There's swimming can be fabulous, it's very low impact. But so, if you're someone who's like, I don't want to move, I don't like to be active, I feel my body hurts afterwards. I can completely relate with that. And you just need to tweak what you're doing. Pick something else and know that in the beginning, it'll be uncomfortable to go to places that you haven't been to in so long. But once you keep getting refamiliarized with these um, parts of literally these experiences and parts of your body that you have mentally detached from, that connection will allow you to find comfort in that stillness. Where previously trying to just go from I'm disconnected to my body to I am now in a meditative, comfortable state, there's no direct path there other than time and time again, just practicing it. And honestly, 10 minutes max. That's all I could do in the beginning. And still, sometimes that's all I need is 10 minutes of stillness. That could be in nature. That could be on my mat, on my meditation pillow. That can be in the bathtub. You can bring those moments in a lot of different places, but just get them in and you'll feel that growing incrementally over time till you crave it and you need it. And the key is the body. And so when people say the breath, the breath is something I care deeply about. And every single one of my practices is breath focused because the breath is how you get into the body. You could be running, you could be playing basketball, you could be swimming. I don't care. You're breathing heavily, you are moving energy and chi in the systems in which that circulates through the fascia and the nadi or these channels that carry energy, just like blood from head to toe, all throughout our whole body. So, breath is super important, but that is just your doorway into getting into your body.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even when it's like whenever I'm in a yoga practice, what I find interesting is generally like middle-ish, there'll be like a moment where you're kind of like, okay, go into the breath and think about this one thing in the body somewhere where you never thought about, and you're like, whoa, I can feel it. If you do that right at the very beginning, you're probably not in the state for that yet. And much like I do a lot of long distance swimming, and when I swim, God, the first like 15 minutes, I'm just swimming. Like I've swam a lot. But then after that 15 minutes, I actually feel like this inhale, exhale. And you're just like, you're in this flow and you just can keep swimming forever. it's different for everybody, and it can be doing all sorts of different things. And that's why I love you mentioned doing different things, because I think when we look up a lot of these things, it's like, oh, we must sit and meditate, we must do this, we must do that, and it's like, no, realistically, do whatever it feels good for you. But there is a sense of exploring something that maybe you haven't done before, and it might open up something. Because I found that even running, I mean, I did triathlon for a long time, but running was always the thing that I was like, no, never more than a mile. Dumb. I would never do that. And then weirdly, after those like 3 or 4 miles in, you just blank out and you run for like another 2 or 3 hours I could run. Yeah. And it's like, and it's however you can feel that flow state, find that, because that's your way to kind of pause. And I think when you look at like that, even 10 or 15 minutes, right? I encourage everybody, if you still have the tracker turned on, check your phone and see how much time you spend on social media or random apps, email, whatever. Most likely you could probably find 10 or 15 minutes somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could carve out 10, 15, no doubt. No doubt. And if you don't like being physical at all, or you can't, like, there's people who cannot be active. That's where the breath work comes in. That's where you still have the breath. You can still access your body and all these free, amazing chemicals that your body produces and, kind of like shoots out into your bloodstream as you manipulate your breath consciously. Again, huge muscle that needs to be built over time. I didn't realize that I was becoming such an expert breather until I had 15 years of practice under my belt. I wasn't trying to be a breather. I wasn't trying to have excellent breath retention or, be able to control and push my breath into different chambers of my body intentionally and zoom into different organs and feel them in there. Ew. I wasn't trying to do that. It's just happened over time. And that it's like something is being sown or seeded into a garden. It really is time release. So, you start today, y- don't worry about what you didn't do, what you did do. You have tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. So there's really no pressure if you didn't make it. There's a whole lifetime to get there, but you definitely have to start and then watch it unfold in real time. It just gets sweeter and sweeter.
Yeah, I mean, I've done breath work for quite a few years now, and what's so interesting is that I've always recognized the benefits of it, but really like recently, it's this like crazy feeling in the body at a certain point, and then that I hadn't felt before, and it's years of doing it, and I went,
Yeah,
whoa,
right.
I just
I know,
unlocked
right?
something way more, and I was like, that
This is
is
why I'm so
so
obsessed.
cool. Yeah,
This is
and
why I
it's
can't get enough.
yep, yep, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, now
It'll
I
never be done. You'll never be like, "Oh, now you're done learning how to breathe the best you can breathe," or now you know all the yoga. Like, that is never gonna happen, which makes me come back for more and more. Like, every day, I'm like, "Yes, there's something else for me to explore in this big world of yoga and breathing." It's amazing.
and I think that's part of the joy of the whole thing. And I think it's staying curious about things and being open to shifting with the change. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons from at least this conversation is really like recognize the things that are around you and give appreciation to things that are around you, but also like evaluate it, pause, look at it, and then just like slowly make shift and change. Change can be a good thing. Forced change might not be a good thing, but free change is. And we all have that power, whether we feel like we have it on a global scale or not. I mean, that's one of the things on our site. I mean, a lot of people can go through and answer questions about sustainability and whether, this product is more sustainable than that or this method or that. But realistically, there's a question on like how big of an impact do you think you can have on the planet? And most people don't answer that they can have an impact on the entire planet. Most of it is the farthest they go is like my town. And it's like, correct. We don't feel like we can have this huge effect. So it's not, yeah, we have individually. And it's like we can impact the rest of the world, but like thinking I'm going to do this to impact the world, it's never going to do anything, really.
Right. Exactly.
Do what you can here, and then
Mhm.
the more other people do that,
Ripple.
the bigger. Yeah, exactly. So
Yep. Agreed.
that's
Tend to your own garden before you start trying to build gardens elsewhere. Yes. Mm. Mhm. Thank you for that. I'm hopeful that we are in a big state of change, all of us, and a conscious awakening to make more empowered decisions. So that education piece is a jagged pill sometimes to swallow, like you were saying at the beginning, but ultimately the goal is to understand our power and that we really can make huge changes in industries, massive, multi-million and sometimes billion-dollar industries that can be changed because we have that power to choose our own domain. Start with your own domain, curate it, design it to a well-being perfection place that suits your particular needs, and that will be the ripple effect. All of your friends and family, everyone will feel that. You can educate them. You can share the knowledge you learned in your process to help others achieve their sustainable but well-being goals. Ultimately, we all want to be well, and our optimal state of operation. And in order to do that, we need to help each other. And I'm honored to be here talking with all of this with you today, and also honored to have my companies as an outlet to share stories, share tips, but also provide examples of how it can be done thoughtfully, consciously, and without incurring harm on the planet, people, plants, animals, all the living things that we love and that we're a part of. So it has been my pleasure. Absolutely. I love chatting with you, Steve, anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the GOAT podcast. You are the reason why we exist and why we show up every single day.
I've spent too many years being against stuff, and I've found now that it's a little bit easier and a little bit more fun to be for something.
How are we going to power the world? How are we going to build the world? How are we going to feed the world?
Company isn't just good or bad, black or white. Usually there's a lot more there, a lot more that they don't know.
It's actually about what you do in your daily life every day can make a huge difference.
Give this episode a share, join our GOAT community, but most importantly, go spend some time in nature because you might find it a meaningful reminder of the amazing place that we get to call home. I'm Steve Cassingham, and we'll see you next time.